From my home turf at Bristol Robotics Lab, I am very proud to introduce Farid Dailami, who is the Director of the Robotics Innovation Facility Bristol, or as it's locally known, RIFBristol. Through their SABRE programme, RIFBristol helps Southwest-based SMEs with an introduction to robotics. The SABRE programme is a great hands-on way to start your automation journey by receiving non-commercialised advice, training and robotic prototyping for businesses based in the Southwest, and has training courses available for application. Dominic is a successful financier and British entrepreneur who founded BritBots back in 2016 to support pioneering individuals and early-stage organisations. Dominic's fund invests in a new generation of intelligent autonomous machines that promise to transform our world. Dominic is passionate about driving the UK economy to improved productivity through the growth of homegrown talent and has so far invested in 15 exciting high-growth companies, including your hosts, Bot-Hive. Now for our next guest, we are again incredibly privileged to have with us all the way from Germany, Dr. Susanne Bieler. Susanne joined the International Federation of Robotics earlier this year as General Secretary and has already made incredible strides as an ambassador for robotics globally. Susanne is a world leader across the robotics industry, the European Robotics Association and E-United Robotics, and has been for 5 years. She began her professional career as Managing Director of the Flat Panel Display Group at the German Engineering Federation, the VDMA, in Frankfurt, where she worked for 7 years. After completing her academic career, Susanne went to the European Commission in Brussels, where she looked into public relations and communications. Welcome to Bristol, Susanne. Paul Grantham is the Senior Relationship Manager for NatWest here in Bristol. Forming a long-term sustainable investment and capital management strategy is one of the biggest challenges facing SME businesses. Paul's focus is to support SME clients in their growth, ambitions and future plans, providing business solutions and connectivity and passing on insight and the benefit of NatWest's dedicated commitment to the UK manufacturing sector via the NatWest Future Fit programme. Paul is an experienced banker and a qualified chartered accountant. Ashu Sharma is an experienced professional in the financial services sector, leading multidisciplinary teams to deliver large front-to-back digital transformation. Ashu has previously headed up a number of projects, leveraging robotics process automation for customer services and customer onboarding, as well as advising a leading UK bank in leveraging artificial intelligence for reducing errors in payments. Ashu works for PwC Consulting and is a true leader in what PwC brand as soft robotics, i.e. robots that you can't see. And finally, chairing the discussion is Bot-Hive's very own head of content, Neil Martin. Having worked in the City of London, Neil is an experienced journalist with a varied background in finance, business strategy, SME business consultant, fintech, startups and robotics. Let me now hand over to Neil and our expert panel. Welcome, everyone.
We're going to kick off by asking each of our panellists a question, one which relates to their particular expertise. We will then debate 3 questions, with each of our panellists invited to add their own views, and hopefully it's more interesting than the Boris Johnson and Jeremy affair, but we'll see how it goes. We will then finish with questions from the audience, so please think of some questions for our panellists. When that comes around, and when Farid comes in, I'll start with questions first to Susanne, who is in from Frankfurt this morning, aren't you? So,
yeah.
Okay. Susanne, what differences do you see between the UK market and the German market to explain why there is such a difference in the adoption of robotics and automation? You've got roughly 3 minutes to answer that one.
Thank you for that question. So let me shortly dive into some numbers to compare the countries better. So in 2018, UK has installed 2,400 industrial robots. Germany, in the same time, has installed about 11 times as many robots. If you want to compare the number of robots in the UK, that's roughly between Poland and Turkey in the number of installations. if you look at so the reason for that is probably that the manufacturing industry has been historically stronger base, but it has had a stronger base in Germany than it has in the UK. If I look at the past 5 years, the number of installations in robotics in the UK has declined by 1%, where Germany has increased by 5%, no, by 8%, excuse me, annually. So since both countries do have different number of workers in manufacturing industry, I can also level it out to the term we call robot density. Robot density is is the number of robots installed per 10,000 manufacturing employees in the manufacturing industry. So UK is at 91, Germany is 338.
Right.
So that's quite a difference. The robot density in the UK is below world average. We've heard that this morning already by Mike, and it's also lower than most of the other OECD countries. And if you look at the robot density in the automotive industry, we even see that it has been declining over the past 5 years. So that's, I think, the only country in the world where the robot density in automotive industry has been on the decline in the past. And one reason for this is that the automotive industry in the UK has massively invested in labor from countries outside the UK, which were invited to come here and to work. It was less investments and so less capital investments, a quick solution, but it's not for long-term success. Automotive industry in Germany thereof has since long periods of time and heavily invested in automation, and you can see that this has not actually led to a decline in manufacturing employment, but rather they have gained competitiveness and could at the same time increase their employment. So that's basically it. And then we see that the systems integrating industry is underdeveloped in the UK compared to Germany. And I think one very important factor is also that in Germany we see that trade unions are on board. So they accept robots and automation. They embrace it. They see the benefits for their employees they represent. And I think in the UK there is still some work to be done in this respect.
Okay, brilliant. Lovely, thank you. Right, Farid, now you're back. We can ask your question. We know the UK faces challenges where productivity is concerned. What role does robotics and automation have to play in addressing this in the coming decade?
Quite an important one, but I think what the question really needs to be addressed more broadly. It's not just robots. If you have a chaotic place, an organization that is not really well oiled, if you like, we tend to have a lot, especially in terms of SMEs, we tend to have lots of places which basically on a daily basis are knife and forking their activities. And if you try and include in that sort of environment robots, you're just adding to that complexity without necessarily seeing the gains from that. So it's a much broader question, it's a much broader answer. You have to examine organization, training, labor, all of those issues need to be included in the mix when you start to say, okay, I have now a piece of equipment that I'm going to put in. Robots are not silver bullets. They are just another piece of equipment that can help you, but you need to have a broad approach to robotics to make sure that you're going about it in the right way. I come across a lot of industry who are looking at putting robots in. Some places are exceptionally successful in using robots, and yet I go into other places which have lots of very modern machinery, but because they haven't examined the robot application in detail, there are a piece of equipment sitting around the shop, and they say, well, we bought that, but we really haven't been able to use it much because they haven't examined the before and after of the robot, the fit of the robot in the organization, in the production system, etc. So we do need to have lots of issues like that addressed before we say, yeah, put the robot in and we're going to get an answer to our productivity problems.
Great, lovely, thank you. Okay, Dominic, you're involved in investment a lot and funds. Do you think investors appreciate the potential of the future of the robotics market?
I think certainly as an investment theme, it is kind of clear that a large proportion of the growth in the economy is going to be driven by automation, as opposed to, historically, dramatically increasing sort of labour or whatever. So I think investors kind of at a conceptual level understand the potential for robotics and automation to be a big driver for growth. However, I think it certainly in this country is still a slightly untested sort of investment pathway. So a lot of money in terms of investment sort of pounds has gone into, fintech, software type related, and still I think in the UK venture investment scene, hardware related investments are still looked upon with some scepticism. And so, we hope to see over the next couple of years a few really good robotic exit success stories, which can slightly sort of challenge that that perception. A lot of the really best companies we're seeing coming through are substantially more sort of capital efficient than sort of the old generation of robotics businesses. So that's a really quite exciting trend for investors.
Okay, great, thank you. Paul, what financial schemes and support is out there to help business get started with automation, do you think?
There is actually quite a lot that's available out there. I don't think it's particularly well advertised, and I guess the challenge that an SME in particular would have is kind of navigating that and staying up to speed with new initiatives that are released. I mean, my advice would be to engage with your bank, your accountant, the guys at Make UK, and just any advisors that you can have in the sector just to help navigate that. I mean, what I should say as well is that when you're thinking about investing in automation or robotics, you're really thinking about three different types of spend. Really, you've got kind of investment in hardware, the robotic equipment itself. You'll nearly always have a soft kind of spend within that as well. There'll be some sort of software or technology that's wrapped within that, and then additionally you'll have a spend in kind of proving the feasibility in embedding what you're looking to achieve within your system and kind of getting that set up, whether that's a monetary cost or a time cost. I mean, I'll just run through kind of some of the examples, but I won't have time to go through each one in a lot of detail, but just things like R&D tax credits, where you can invest in new products or new processes even. You can have kind of tax refunded back to you in that case. You've got knowledge transfer partnerships, particularly relevant, I think, for the kind of the feasibility testing and setting up a new scheme, particularly if it's a new investment in robotics. That's essentially where you can have the salary of a knowledgeable individual funded for you. Come and join your organisation for a limited period of time. You've got the annual investment allowance, and you've got government-led initiatives like Innovate UK as well, where you can apply for funding alongside a process. I should obviously do a plug for the banking sector as well. There is bank funding available for these things. I mean, obviously it will depend on the individual circumstances in each scenario. But no, it is very much something that is available. I guess if I was to to throw the challenge that I would, if ever I was, that's ultimately the role that I fulfill with the bank. If someone was to ask me for money, I would probably throw two challenges back, which is ultimately how, to what certainty can you say that what you're looking to achieve will work, and to the effect, kind of what consultation have you sought, and then secondly, what contribution are you able to make to ensure that the scheme is a success. And that's both kind of initially in terms of initial investment, but then also through the scheme as you proceed, which obviously will be in part paying back any funding. But no, I do think there's a lot out there actually, and I think there's clearly an agenda from government to improve innovation and productivity, just not the easiest to navigate.
Right, okay, great, thank you. Ashu, what has been your firm's strategy when discussing the merits of automation with companies?
So there are kind of a number of things, and just to give the audience a view, I work a lot in the front office and the back office, and not so much in the manufacturing where the robots are putting the bolts or picking up the parcels. So when we talk to our client, and largely in the, as I said, front office and the back office spaces, the strategy, is largely to show them the benefits and that they can get using the robots. And the principles that have been discussed this afternoon are pretty much the same, whether it is manufacturing or a front office or back office. But to start with, it's the productivity is the foundational stuff that, look, you're spending so much of time and man hours being spent on doing these manual activities and rule-based repetitive tasks. You don't really need to. Humans have got better things to do. There's a lot of stuff coming now on the compliance side of things. To give you a simple example is when I'm putting my expenses, am I claiming 50 quid for a lunch? Then my manager can say, whoa. But instead of manager, I have to look at it. These days, the software robots can check the compliance is there or not, so that's easy. What I'm very excited with is the ability to, serve your customer better, because if you're serving your customer better, then it's good for your business, the revenue growth, and people also enjoy when the customer is happy, and there's a lot software robots are doing it. Give a simple example. I was applying for my daughter's zip card. People in London area know about it. It allows you to have a discounted travel for kids, and I was applying it on a Sunday at 1 o'clock. You fill the form, and I uploaded her passport scanned copy around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And 2 o'clock, I had an email saying it's all approved, because the details I had put in were correct. It matched with the, the photograph was also pretty much similar on the passport, and everything is done. So as a customer, I'm not waiting after I have just, applied for my services that, oh, it's gone in, darling, I'll tell you when they come back to me, I might have to phone. All that is gone within an hour on a Sunday. So it's not a human doing it at the back. So when it's a happy path of an application, your customer. So when my request to each one of you would be is that look at opportunities, how you can, just simple thing, how can I respond to my customer better? Can I look at it in my back office around accuracy, around reducing the manual efforts of pulling data from 2 or 3 and reconciling and making things. These are good low-hanging fruits that you should look at, and that's what we talk about with our customers as well.
Okay, brilliant. All right, thank you. Okay, debate time. So, first debate question, if you could just join in, please. First one is, how do we get UK industry to embrace automation? And Suzanne, shall I kick off with you? How do we get UK to embrace automation?
Well, I would say a lot depends on this Brexit situation, that it's being solved at some point in the, I don't know when in the future. I think if UK leaves the EU, then companies have to massively invest
if the UK
in...
leaves,
Phrase it like that. Companies have to massively invest in automation technology because they will lose the labor force necessarily to produce goods otherwise. Another very effective measure, which right now also closely relates to the Brexit, is give companies investment security. So the Brexit situation at the moment is bringing uncertainty to investors in the UK. We already saw that some companies looking at investment opportunities in Europe actively decided against the UK and took investment opportunities or investment decisions to other countries. So I think the framework conditions, and that's the work of the policy side, do get your homework done, do provide the appropriate framework conditions for companies to be able to invest in automation and know that their investment is safe and they can plan for the future.
Okay, great. Dominic, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I think historically, while robotics has been very much focused at sort of higher volume manufacturing and relied on, substantial integrator networks, robotics companies have not really had any motive to be really amazing at marketing. But as sort of robotics filters down into the wider economy, the need for fantastic marketing in this area just becomes so important.
And that's been lacking, hasn't it?
Oh, completely lacking. And, robotics business builders tend not to be sort of naturally great marketeers just because of their sort of background. But I think the transformation will come when it's easy for operators of, say, small and mid-sized businesses to have a look at their robotic options and very easily identify use cases which are very similar to the ones that they face. And as that kind of sophistication of marketing and sort of market knowledge filters through the industry, I think that will be really, really transformative for uptake.
Actually, do you?
No, I'll add to marketing, and what I would add to that is just education, in terms of what is possible. I mean, at the moment there is a media, they like to sell the negative things, the robots are coming and they're going to take your jobs and things like that. And I think that's far from reality or truth is. In fact, robots are going to liberate us. So when we go to the clients, and then I particularly go and say, look, we used to do our projects saying, oh, we'll come, analyze, develop a robot, and then train you and hand it over to you. Now we are changing our methodology totally upside down. We say we'll train you first, so that you are part of what we are trying to do and what the opportunities are. Because people who are doing the job, whether it is invoice payments or any of the processes that they want to automate, they know exactly what the rules-based and the repetitive tasks are. They are in a best position to kind of automate it themselves. So to me, I think is the education, and right from the schools and even in the organization saying, look, this is what it is about. And the good news is they're not very complex. I mean, as was said earlier as well, very easy user interfaces now to develop a robot. I mean, I would put it as it's getting where the Excel is, where you can put a formula and do things. That's where the software robots are getting as well.
Farid, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I very much agree with that.
Yeah.
We
all agree, don't we?
Yes.
Paul, say something different when it comes to your turn.
Be controversial.
Yeah, sorry.
Paul and I actually do collaborate in doing precisely that.
Yeah.
Paul brings in some of his clients into our place, and we go through that education exercise. We take them around the lab, we show them what's possible, and invariably from that we get engagements where they're saying to us, can you come and have a look at what we're doing and see whether or not robotics is applicable to our particular operation. One of the most successful ones, and Paul mentioned KTPs, we worked with Pneumatic International, people who make Henry vacuum cleaners. And they went in with the idea that maybe robotics would be part of the solution. Now, out of that particular exercise, now they're in a position of installing their third robotic assembly line. And the improvement on productivity has been enormous. But it's a question of that education. They came and had a look at the lab, they came and had a look at what we were doing, and they said, yeah, okay, it looks as though there might be some room. Can you come and have a look at us and tell us whether or not we can do some robotics? I went and had a look. He said, yep, that's a good application. We can do something with that. Nothing too complicated, nothing too difficult. But because it was a KTP, one of the key aspects of a KTP is you have to show from the outset that if you succeed, it is going to improve your bottom line. Otherwise, you will not get the funding. And that worked out exceptionally well. So I would suggest if you get a chance to go and see that operation over in Pneumatic, please do, because that is an excellent example of how the whole process can work and how people can benefit from it, how manufacturers can benefit from it.
Paul, you're last up to agree with the...
Yeah, sorry, I'm not going to be too controversial, actually. I mean, I want to just share a couple of observations, really, just over, say, the last 5 years or so of working with SME businesses. I mean, yeah, if I look back 5 years ago, the primary reason why I would be approached, in a discussion around, the purchase or introduction of robotics would be driven upon increasing profit. Probably it would be a robot can do it at a cheaper rate or at a faster rate than the current process is, whatever that is, means that we can increase our profitability. I am starting to see that turn. It's probably a kind of a product of the economic environment, but I'm starting to see much more conversations now as robotics as a risk mitigant, certain labour risks, quality risks, things like that. I'm starting to see much more conversations originate through that agenda. But a more direct kind of response to the question is simply one of, I think it's removing the barriers, simply. I think the biggest barrier that we have, particularly in SME businesses, is probably a cultural one. I think it does play back to, I think, what Mike was saying at the start of the kind of the agenda today. But no, I think that there is still that impression that robots will replace jobs, that they are a threat to somebody's work. And I think to successfully install robotics, you do have to kind of have the whole organisation on board. I see very rare, kind of examples of where you will kind of replace workforce all in one go by a set of robots. You need this kind of process where both work side by side, because the workforce have got the knowledge and the experience, and they're in part passing that on to the robots, to the process, making sure it works correctly, and then gradually they can be, and they're doing much nicer tasks ultimately. They're doing much more fulfilling roles within an organisation, adding much more value. So cultural is the biggest barrier for me.
So we all embrace automation. We're feeling in a good mood about it, are we?
Yes.
Dominic's not saying anything there now.
No, I think we definitely will, but I think it will be a great day when we start to see a few of these things in sort of day-to-day life a bit more. I think there needs to be a sort of Apple iPhone moment where suddenly, there is something that's just immediately apparent to everyone. That this sort of new sort of set of technologies, particularly for the service industry, has sort of arrived, and I think we're still sort of waiting for that day.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, next question. Interesting one. This: should robots pay tax? So who wants to pick that one up first? Farid, I think you've got some opinions on that, haven't you?
Robots as they are now, as we see them, particularly in industry, they're nothing other than a piece of industrial equipment. We don't go around and say, oh, there is a lathe there and there's a pillar drill there, and we need to tax these things. A robot is exactly the same sort of piece of kit. It uses motors, it uses sensors, etc., etc. And more often than not, if you go in industry, it's sitting behind closed doors, it's sitting behind cages. So the idea to turn around and say, oh, we need to tax that, seems a little bit, for me at any rate, difficult to take on. Now, if they become more and more prevalent in service industry, and they're amongst us, then you might start to say, okay, there might, now, because your next question is, do they have rights?
Well, don't give it away.
Yes, but
Just ruin the whole thing.
so I think putting those together, I think then you might start to say, well, yes, maybe we should consider it. And given, although the ethical question seems to be more about application rather than the robots themselves, on the question of whether or not they should be taxed, my thinking currently is no. They are just a piece of machinery, and let's leave them as they are.
Emphatic no.
Yes.
Okay. Cool.
I'm not going to be the controversial one again. I don't think. I'm emphatic, probably just as emphatic as Farid about that. Actually, I think introducing a tax would just be another barrier to the adoption of robotics.
Is that your thinking at the moment? Not so maybe in 10 years' time when robots are walking around and in the factory and doing all the things that a worker might be doing.
I still
20 years maybe.
I don't feel that there needs to be an individual tax on an individual robotic unit, if that makes sense. I mean, I guess the theory for this would be that robots will ultimately be replacing humans who would be earning a wage and they would be paying tax, but obviously they would be paying the tax rather than the. I mean, I guess in this example, the robot paying tax, it would be the company that owns the robot that would ultimately be putting the tax bill. Yeah, so I don't think that's quite. I don't really see that working, particularly not in the next 10 years or so. And I mean, ultimately, if the company is more profitable, it will be paying more tax, ultimately by way of corporation tax at the bottom end. So for me, I think the biggest. I'm probably thinking more short term, but the biggest thought in my head about that is that it introduces just that additional barrier to the adoption of robotics.
Which makes our job harder for all of us to persuade people to use robots.
Yeah, and you could have this scenario in the future where you know that you're thinking about investing in another, say a 2-module system. That would mean that there's 2 separate robots that have to pay a different two taxes. Yeah. Whereas if you could get by with one that was
one's
less
a higher
efficient,
earner, one's a lower earner.
But yeah, so or you could have a single module that would be less efficient but would be more tax efficient, if that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah. Actually, what do you think on it?
So, I mean, fundamentally, I'm a robot enthusiast, so totally no. And, we are not adding extra sugar to people's food or something like that. It has to be taxed or anything like that. I mean, we are, on the contrary, liberating people, giving them time to go for a run in the afternoon or whatever. So, to me, tax doesn't make sense. But interestingly, it's a matter of really months or maybe 6 months that the robots will start taxing, and I'll tell you how. Particularly in the service industry, the robot model, the software robot model is moving to software as a service. What it would mean is that if you're, let's say, you've got robot as a service for invoice processing, and they will charge you on an hourly basis, and you can say, here you go, my 100 invoices to be processed, and this is what it is. Scan it, process it, do the 3-way matching, and even pay the supplier if everything is fine. And those software as a service will charge you on a per hourly basis. And the price is going to be very aggressive, something like 8 to 10 pound an hour, but it will process 100 or maybe 1,000. But mind you, it will be 8 to 10 hour plus VAT. So we will start paying tax through that kind of a mechanism. So, and government sort of tax revenue through VAT will go up. So it's got to come in that kind of a way into the market. But I don't see, in manufacturing, it is another machinery and the kit we have, and there's no need to pay tax.
Okay, Dominic, you say something?
Well, I think most Western economies have a fundamental problem of a declining workforce. So, just fundamentally, we all face the challenge of having a smaller workforce, probably to fund a bigger overall tax bill. So I'm sure there will be no area where governments don't try and eke out extra taxation to try and solve that very fundamental economic problem. Whether or not it's a robot tax or whether or not that's the right thing to do, we are bound to be moving into a heavily taxed world, or we're going to have to get very good at getting robotics to deliver very cheap public services to people. One or the other.
One or the other, yeah. Suzanne? What do you...
Yeah, as he already said, it would bring companies definitely at the disadvantage. We rather should support companies investing in new technology because it makes them more competitive. And this leads to companies actually being able to pay more taxes on their profits they make. So there is already some research done on this topic, and they found that automation actually leads to tax increases, and it's beneficial to the social security system. So we should rather get rid of that idea. And apart from the argument that it's difficult to draw the line, where do I start, where do I stop? Do I also tax the vacuum cleaner I have at home or the lawnmower? So where would we say it's a robot that should be taxed, and where does it stop?
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, third and final question, debate question, which Farid nicely gave away.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Stole my thunder there. Do robots need rights? Now, okay, we're not talking about really the cobot as now it needs a right, but in 10, 15 years' time when robots are more prevalent in the factory and they're doing more things and involved in the service industry, do you think we need to protect the robots? That's you, isn't it?
I personally think instead of right, I would definitely say robots do need more respect. And again, robot enthusiast I am. The most annoying thing is if someone has changed the application and you come in the Monday morning and then your robot is not working and you just say, God, now I'll have to now manually do all this thing till I fix my robot. So to my mind, again, the research at the moment is saying no. This is a piece of machinery and they're not sentient at the moment. But to even to my kids, I say to them, talk to Alexa with respect. And we have got our, iRobot, and I take extra care of it to just make sure it does the vacuum cleaning in the night, as per the plan. So to my mind, robot definitely need that tender, loving care and respect. Just take care of your robots. They are precious. So.
Brilliant, Suzanne.
Do you never talk to your computer disrespectfully? Which is also a machine in a way. So
He beats the computer.
I think we must be careful not to a robot is a machine and it stays a machine, and we should not humanize the robots by giving them rights. I don't really
But when it can talk
have
back
yet.
and-
I don't have yet heard good arguments why no robots need rights. We heard some in the last talk. We heard some arguments that we have to solve the data protection issue. We have to solve the copyright issue. We might need that, or we may need that in the future. That is probably true, but I don't think that giving rights to robots will solve these issues.
Okay, cool.
I'm not sure where. Yeah, I just struggle with this one a little bit. I've got to admit, maybe I'm not forward thinking enough. But I think it's more interlinked with human rights. I think where you've got any element of society or any human, if you like, that would rely on a robot for whether it's a safety kind of function, whether it's even part of their employment. Really, their role relies on the certain things like regular servicing, maintenance, things like that of robots. Could you consider that right? Ethical usage of robots, things like that seem sensible. I think the most obvious place where this will become more hotly debated will be in the world of AI, artificial intelligence, just the controls. I think ultimately it probably will need to be a regulated industry ultimately. I'm probably veering off a little bit, but that's probably the most hottest area where this will need to be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dominic.
Yeah, picking up from that, I do think that the landscape of sophisticated robotics is likely to almost the biggest barrier to adoption is likely to be the sort of regulatory burden, and we're already seeing with things like driverless cars. The thing which will stop driverless cars coming onto our streets is not that the driverless car works, it's the regulation around it prevents it from happening. And I suspect as kind of robotics promoters, that will be really almost the biggest barrier to adoption of this technology over the decade that I see. I think the technology is moving on very fast, but the regulation is quite a long way behind. So, the robots' rights are being sort of looked after by the regulators.
Okay, fair point.
Yeah.
Farid?
Yes, I agree. I think over time we might have to. Well, we will be confronted with this. There are at the moment lots of work that's been done in different actuators, different controllers, different sensors, etc. And who's to say that in 20 years' time we will not have robots which are very anthropomorphic? So be difficult to look at them and not feel that, okay, there is something here that I need to respect, and maybe it should have some rights, maybe. For me, it's very difficult because I look at it as a machine. And at the moment, I can't change my perception that this is a machine.
But if it looked like a human, as a robot,
If it
and
looks...
someone hit it, would you say, stop that? I mean, I can't...
Well, in fact, probably if somebody hit a pillar drill, I would say, stop doing that. Why are you doing that? So yeah, in that sense, I would want to protect that piece of equipment, if you like. But there are other issues that are coming along quite fast, actually. There are issues around ethics in robots when you start to apply robots in particular situations, and where you're beginning now. If a robot is to interact with me, for example, it's listening to my ideas and it's a counselor, are there any ethical issues there? Is there anything in there? What happens if it's a sex robot? Are there any...
I was going to avoid that topic. But
No, we can't avoid it. If we're going to go there, we cannot avoid this. These are all the, if you like, the whole spectrum that is going to open, and we need to have ideas about how we're going to handle all these very complex issues. So I think it's good to raise them. I am afraid I don't have any answer for any of those, but I think we should raise them. I think we should start asking those questions.
Great stuff. Lovely. Okay, any audience questions for our panellists here, please?
I've got more of a point to make. It's just adding to what was just said, if that's okay, if I'm quick.
Please do.
There's a historian, Yuval Noah Harari, who's written two very big books. Written two very big books, one of which ends with trying to address some of these problems. And he focuses on the idea of consciousness somehow. In other words, there are a very large number of things that robots can do, including appearing to be conscious without actually being conscious, and that he claims, at least from a slightly removed distance from the actual details of the technology, that consciousness is the point at which the robot would acquire rights. Discuss. I don't think that solves the problem, but it does actually point in a slightly different direction. I think you can see what he means. In other words, a driverless vehicle could do everything that it needs to do whilst doing it in the mode in which is kind of more closely matched to what we do unconsciously when we're driving. In other words, we do some things unconsciously and some things consciously, but quite a lot of it could actually be done unconsciously, as your sat-nav, for example, could tell you that you should take the second turning on the right without actually being a conscious... The sat-nav itself is not a conscious machine, but it's doing the thing that you would do consciously.
Yeah,
See what I mean?
do you want a driverless car? Does anyone want to drive a driverless car or be in a driverless car? Would you prefer to keep driving?
Oh, I would love to have a driver.
Yeah, so would I personally, but I'd have to be
Why not?
writing or reading or watching the TV or something.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Suzanne?
I think we'll need some more time until it's really progressed enough that I really would trust.
You're not confident yet to...
It's. I think it's more a matter of trust yet, yes.
Dominic?
Yeah, no, I'd absolutely love one. I spend more hours than I'd like driving, waste effortlessly. And trains are always so full. The great thing about a car is it's
your own
personal
environment.
space.
Farid?
I think I already have decided that I prefer an automatic rather than a gear stick. And I look at that and say, well, that's fantastic. When I'm sat in traffic jam, all I've got to do is just use one pedal and not really that worried. So yes, if I could press a button and that's it, or forget about it, read my paper or read my book, then yeah.
We've all agreed on that point. Any other questions?
Hello, Vanessa Whiteley of IGUS. I, as a sort of representative of business development and automation at our company, the issues that we're facing, although we're interacting and engaging with a lot of automation integration companies, the big issues that we're finding is how do we sort of change this culture that a lot of SMEs have of no, I don't want to spend that money. A few zeros look quite daunting to many companies. when, although Automata's got this great sort of low-cost automation product, it's still a huge investment, and culture is still not sort of encouraging companies like us to be able to go and visit these SMEs and change their perspectives. How do you, I guess the entire panel suggests that companies like us can start to change the perception of SMEs so that they can say, yeah, I'll do a 2-year return of investment program to improve my productivity?
Do you want to take that first point?
Yeah, so essentially just what can be done to improve the culture amongst SMEs ultimately. Yeah, I think it's one of awareness. I mean, there's a whole other point that wraps around this as well, which is kind of the economic point as well. You know, I won't kind of focus on that too much, but obviously there needs to be some level of confidence in the economy and things like that, because it will nearly always involve some sort of capital outlay. That's another barrier that's slightly separate, but I think I think gradually something that I'm seeing is manufacturers are moving more from a kind of autocratic decision-making process where you would have a small number of decision makers, and anyone who had an idea would have to make a case, and would all rely on. I think the first barrier, the first kind of step towards doing that is opening things up to allowing the use kind of everyone within an organisation to contribute towards moving forward and feeling inclusive within that decision-making process. That's probably the biggest thing for me. I am noticing that more. Maybe this is a bit controversial, but and you wanted a bit of controversy, right?
I did. Haven't got much, but
I am seeing with younger generation manufacturers that are coming through that is more the case.
Anyone else like to pick
It's
that
rather
up?
difficult for me to leave in a low-key way. Isn't it? I'm going to go.
Excuse me
Especially
one
after that
second.
long question you gave us.
Yeah, sorry.
So
Did
maybe
you
I
want
can
to-
add a bit. I think it's good to start with easy tasks. So if you approach companies to convince them to start automating their production, go to tasks that you already know that are easy to automate. Don't start with the challenging ones. I think often people think of the difficult processes, but we should rather focus on the low-hanging fruit. And then you have good case studies, and good cases you can also explain to other people or other companies that are yet hesitant, and show them how their competitors got more productive and more successful by using automation. I think that is one good step for success.
Ashim, do you want?
No, I'll kind of just summarize it. I think there's one aspect that is not in your control, which is touched upon the uncertainty of the market, so they just don't feel, let's spend it. Or the point made on the marketing aspect is so weak that they don't appreciate the benefits that they're going to get. So that's not. But definitely start with the low. Take them to another client, and as I was discussed, when they see it happening, the return on investment they have got, it's show them the Ford, the Henry Ford quotation that was given in the morning, that given in the afternoon, that you otherwise end up paying anyway and will not even own this kind of thing. Another trick is that give them free for 3 months, and then when you try to take it away, they'll say, "Oh, where are you taking it?" So it may not be possible all the time, but start easy, show them, take it to another client, give them for free. I mean, these are kind of good ways of doing it. But I know it's hard. It's not easy.
Dominic?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say, again, I don't know whether it's relevant, but obviously we've seen in sort of soft robotics the prevalence of sort of software as a service models for small and mid-sized companies, which has been just totally transformative, because rather than having to pay heavy license fees up front, people have just been able to pay on a monthly basis, and we're starting to see more and more of that type of business model come into robotics. So people will be effectively able to use their robot on a pay-per-use basis rather than making these big capital investments, which might well be a lot more expensive for the company in the long run, but it makes it much more affordable in the short term. Yeah.
Great. Any other questions? Here's one. missed out. I think. Yeah,
just grabbing this one a second. Gash Buller from Control 2K. Right at the beginning of the panel discussion, and by the way, it's been a great discussion, it's been a great event so far. I think Farid really alluded to one of the biggest issues that we're facing from the deployment angle, and it's understanding manufacturing in the UK. It's an industry that's been around for a long time, and it's about systemization. And a lot of the smaller companies, it's not that they don't want to. Of course, if you go to a company and say, do you want to increase profits? Which managing director is going to say, oh, no, forget it, it's okay. Yeah? It's how we actually implement and understand the industry. And so some of the graphs that we saw, the UK being 22nd on the list, it's really the legacy systems, the legacy principles. And it's really going back to bringing in basic engineering skills, Lean Sigma principles, and then deploying some of these new systems. It's understanding the business. And so these SMEs, absolutely, you need to demonstrate it. But step one is systemization. If you don't have systemization, you can't bring in automation. And I think some of that education needs to start a step earlier in terms of educating people on how you can introduce robotics. So robotics themselves, as you said, fantastic. But don't forget, in the UK, you've got thinking operators. You've got people who will make decisions. Although you put a process on the shop floor, the process isn't necessarily followed, because the operators will go, oh, actually, do you know what? That needs to be done this way and the other way. And you can't really replicate that. So I think it's about understanding the culture. Of course, there has to be a culture change. But it's about understanding that culture and bringing in step one before you can start to bring in step two. Comments?
I think we'd all agree with that, I think. Anyone got any particular?
Well, my particular experience in that regard is that I've had people come in and say, yep, you're the robotics place, tell us how we can use a robot. You sit down with them, you talk to them, and after about 5 minutes you realize that they're as far away as they possibly could be from implementing a robot. There's no organization, they haven't got a clue what's going on in their plant. When you ask them, okay, how does the work flow? What do you mean by that? They haven't got a clue. And putting a robot in those circumstances, you're just doing them a disservice. So the first thing for me always is to them, go and get yourself organized. We're happy to come and help you. Get yourself organized, and then we'll find out whereabouts we can put a robot in. And in answer to your question regarding what can we do, sorry, I had to go out, what we can do in terms of expanding the use of robotics or making the system integrators' life a little bit more easier. A lot of people, when they start to look at implementing and acquiring robotics, they go to a system integrator and they say, right, this is our problem, this is what we want to solve, can you please supply us with a system? System integrator looks at the problem, and invariably when you're looking at robotics and putting robots in places in industry, there's a lot of risk associated with that. When you're trying to solve these problems, they're not as straightforward as buying a lathe and putting stuff in it. You have to have a system around the robot. You have to bring material in, you have to take material, etc., etc. So the system integrator knows that there is a risk associated with this. So they have some margin that allows for that risk. They give the quote to the company concerned looks at it, counts the equipment, the physical equipment, tots it all up and says, hang on, that bears no resemblance to what I'm being charged. Why is that? And I get that a lot. Yeah. Why are they charging us so much? Because it's risky, because when you apply, they don't know what the challenges are. They have to cover that risk. And it's that kind of education that we need to bring in more and more, especially to SMEs.
Brilliant. I think there was one final question there, if you've got the microphone.
Yes. Hello. I work for a company called, I don't know if this is
working.
It's working. I work for a company called People for Research, and we recruit people to test specific products like websites or apps. we've noticed in the past that there are some companies that struggle with the idea of investing money in testing products to better develop them and provide a good customer experience to their customers. Have you noticed that there's this struggle as well in the robotics industry, or are in general robotics and IA companies quite willing to invest in testing properly and researching properly before actually developing the products? Because we've seen a lot of products like AI being developed with bias, biased AI, and that could be a problem if robotics become mainstream.
I would say it's twofold. On one hand, we have the concerning the safety of systems. I think robotic systems, especially industrial robotic systems being brought on the market, are really tested thoroughly to be safe. That's one aspect. I think if you look at the usability of systems, industrial robots have a long history of having very complicated and complex operating systems where you really needed longer training in special academies to be able to program that. I think that has been improved over the past, say, decade, and robots are becoming more user-friendly, and so we're on a good way there, but it's still a way for improvement, I think, in that respect.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I would say too that actually just coming back to the previous question, I wonder whether there is a kind of a new manufacturing culture that can come through education, where actually kids and students can, learn to work with cobots at a much earlier age. So actually, in terms of even if people go into production manufacturing jobs, they carry with them the school of sort of continuous automation of the sorts of things they do, and they know how to just bring in these technologies. So if they come across repetitive tasks, they very quickly can just spin up a sort of robotic system to take care of that. I think our workers will become much more productive if those sorts of skills are started to be brought in as early as possible. I think on the whole, just on the second question, particularly sort of robotic startups are really bad at trying to identify market need before starting to build their products. On the whole, they're sort of driven by engineers who immediately just want to build stuff really quickly, and that seems to be quite a prevalent culture in this particular industry.
Great, I think that's it. Now then, I think we're running late. Right, thank you, panel. Lovely, thank you.
Thank you.